name's Tom Slowmaker. I'm Deputy Head of Policy at WaterAid, and I'll be chairing this discussion today, which is, I think, the fifth or sixth in this series of meetings organised to talk about the emerging results and impacts from the Governance and Transparency Fund programmes funded by DFID, of which there are quite a large number. One of which is managed by WaterAid and our partners. And the particular theme that we're going to be picking up in this session is on the question of sustainability. So how do we sustain these programs or these actions, and with a particular focus for WaterAid, of course, on governance of the water and sanitation sector. On the panel, I have with me Papa Diouf on my left here, who is the manager of our GTF programme at WaterAid. I have Hilary Coulby, who is a consultant working with WaterAid and helping us on this whole question of sustainability. And on the far side, Mike Batcock from DFID, Civil Society Department. What I propose to do is to run firstly through a presentation from Papa, looking at the WaterAid programme and some of the emerging lessons and challenges, and then to hand over to Hilary to talk about this general question of sustainability and how we deal with it. And then we'll break for some questions and answers, particularly about the WaterAid programme and WaterAid's approach. And then we'll move on to hear from Mike about some of DFID's latest thinking on this question, and then we'll look to hear from you as well, particularly those other GTF grant holders, about how you're dealing with this whole issue of sustainability. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Papa for the first presentation. I'm going to try and keep you to around 15 minutes, Papa.
Maybe 22.
Maybe 20 if you're lucky.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to WaterAid. Can you all see the presentation? Yes? Okay, so my name is Papa. I'm the GTF program manager. So I'm going to give you a flavor of our program. So what we're trying to achieve. There are three parts in this presentation, of course. The first part is giving you the context of the water and sanitation sector. The second part is more how the GTF has helped us to address those issues, to work within that context. And the third one is more to give you some example of progress towards sustainability. I want to make clear here that we're not giving any panacea for sustainability. So what we're giving you is some key elements that we've included in our program in order to make it more sustainable going forward. Right? I've never used this before, so bear with me. Yes. It's working, okay. Yeah, so that's the overview, which I just give you. So in terms of context, sorry for the color, yeah, but that's the true reality. Around 2.646 billion people don't have access to water and sanitation today. About 800 million don't have access to water. That's the true reality. We have countries like Burkina Faso with only 3% of coverage in sanitation. There is a lack of accountability mechanism, lack of capacity at CSO level. There is inexistence of platforms, CSO platform to raise their voice. There is political instabilities and so on. Some of these issues may be familiar to you, but these are really important in our sector. In terms of MDGs, for instance, it seems that we have achieved the MDGs in water, but we are very, very far to achieve the MDGs in sanitation. So these are the context within which we are operating. Amber, there's some good stuff. There is the UN has recognized the right to water and sanitation a couple of years ago. There is some clear institutional arrangement, some clear legal frameworks in place. Decentralization has been in place, or trying to be in place, for the past 30 years. It's amber because although some countries have ratified the right to water and sanitation, implementation is still an issue. It's not being implemented. Decentralization, of course, 30 years ago we've been discussing about that, but until today it's not fully completed. Legal framework, you have the perfect legal framework in most of the country, but not being implemented whatsoever. So it's amber. I'm going to give you a brighter, scope. We have the post-2015 discussion that we're having at the moment. So we're thinking already post the MDGs, what can we actually do? What should be our next focus, which is a bit positive. Sorry, it's a bit too red, isn't it?
It's a bit too low.
Yeah. So our GTF program, so what we're trying to do is to improve accountability and responsiveness of the duty bearers, so government and service providers all together, in order to ensure that we have a sustainable and equitable watch delivery for the most marginalized. And this is done in two parts. This is done by trying to have a sustainable right-based approach, that's one, but through evidence-based advocacy, which is really important today. So that's the scope of our program. So we're operating today in about 16 countries. And I would say the complexity of the program is we operating at 3 levels, not in all countries, but 3 levels: local, national, and sometimes regional. Regional would mean continental, if you want. You would see that, in Central America, for instance, they are working at the 3 levels. So the community level intervention, or the lesson drawn out of the community level intervention, fit into the national level, which in fine fit into the regional level. And you could see that most of our program has a national level component. Yeah, I think it's very important to understand the linkages. So we're trying to make the link between the community level or the local level intervention with the national with the regional, and the regional with the continental, and sometimes the continental with the international as well, because we have some international coalitions working together. It's complex because of that one, but it's complex as well because each of these countries has a particularity. If we take the case of Mali, for instance, a very nice example, we're operating there, they operate at national level, but today, or a year ago, they had a coup. So everything that we've done up to now, it's, we went back to square one, basically. Yeah. So this political context is really important to take into consideration in our work. Our theory of change, put it in quotes, yeah. It's not about the definition of theory of change, but that's the way we structure our program. It's supposed to be sequential, but it's not sequential because our partners, let me rewind. Let me explain you first what it means. It starts from the capacity. So we're talking about capacity of the CSO or CSO network to be able to influence watch policies and practices. So that's the first bit. Again, CSOs, we mean our local partners. So within that scope of the program, we're working with around 30 organizations that are community-based organizations, non-governmental organizations, and non-governmental organization networks, national networks, right? So we want these partners to have this capacity to influence the watch policies. But when they have that capacity, they should be able to engage a bit more in decision-making processes. And this is not only going participating to decision-making meeting. It's about participating but adding a value to those discussions as well. So when they have that, the third level is the people that they're representing are better informed, they're empowered to demand accountability and assertiveness from their duty bearers. And the last point is more from the supply side, which government or duty bearers, they should be willing and they should be able to provide the services. They should be able to be more accountable and responsive to the needs of the end users. So that's our theory of change. This is what we're aiming to do. But as I was saying, it's sequential, but it's not actually, because within our program, we saw that some partners, they were stronger in engagement decision-making process, but didn't think about the capacity, if you see what I mean. So we would like it ideally to be like this, but it did not happen really in reality like that. Yeah? Sustainability Now program. So we looked at 2 aspects. The sustainability of our actions, which has 3 levels. This is through the empowerment of the communities, But that empowerment of the communities will lead to a change in the relationship between the state and the people, if you want. And then the third bit is the institutionalization of these actions. Yeah, that would take them to making them more sustainable. And the second bit of the sustainability is our partner organization, because they're contributing a lot into this. So there is a need to develop their capacity, be able to strengthen their voice, to be able to support the sustainability of the action. So that's the two bits of sustainability that we kind of use within our program. What does it actually mean? This is an example. Assuming that we have this continuum, so this is where we want to get at the end of the day, whether it's in 20 or 30, 40, 50, 10, 100 years. But we want sustainable and equitable water and sanitation for all, and supported by good governance system in place, right? So if this is where we are today, a lack of accountability from duty bearers, a lack of weak capacity from CSO, the GTF came at this point, right? So the GTF basically helped us to move from here and possibly to here. My point here is we can't talk about sustainability. The idea is not sustainability of this yellow bit. I mean, that's almost not possible. It's what are the sustainability seeds that we planted here that will have an impact going further, yeah, towards achieving our final goal. If that makes sense. Our programmatic approach. So I talked about empowerment. The way we deal with empowerment, I'm not sure whether you can see the bottom, but the first block is about awareness. So awareness have 3 levels. So information will be the first one. I'm informed of my rights and entitlements. Then I need to internalize it. I need to be able to make some connection, and that's where the knowledge comes. Yeah, and from that knowledge, this is where I use different tools in order to do that power analysis. Why am I not getting actually what I should be getting? This is my right to get X, Y, Z. Why am I not getting it? Then that's take you to the next level, which is voice. So the communities will get to that next level, which is okay. This is wrong. So I need to voice. Very importantly, to come back to this first block, our partner organization in this information, they're more like teachers, where they're actually showing or teaching, you know, what is it? What is that context? But when we leave that information from knowledge and power analysis, ideally you would want the community themselves to be able to react, yeah, or to act. Then you have the voice, which lead to influence, and then you will have empowerment. So that empowerment should take you to, or should bring out sustainability, but unless it's done in a proper way. So that's the way we kind of, the framework within which we've been operating within our program, right? So our local partners giving that trigger, that first push, but then the community themselves, they need to internalize it and get empowered. Is it okay until now? Yeah. So what I'm going to give you now is some example of as I said at the beginning, progress towards sustainability. This is the case in India. I'm sure most of you will be very familiar with India. But this is the kind of, let's say, framework within which we've been operating. So the framework starts by situational analysis, which is, if you remember, the first diagram is about the information. So I'm gathering all those information. I need to understand what is really happening, and this is done with the communities using community scorecards, social audits, etc. Then there is a community mobilization. Very important to bring the community to kind of understand what this information means. But one of the most important is the capacity building. Having that information at once, but how do I use that information in order to claim my entitlement or to claim my rights? For those who are familiar with India, we have this powerful tool that they call the Right to Information Act. I think we have other countries having that as well, but I think it's the most powerful in India, where every citizen can request any kind of information to the government. The government has 30 days to respond, literally. So this capacity building is crucial because having that information when we train them to file an RTA application, then it's gone. They're gone. When they understand, they're gone. This is where they start filing the RTAs and start advocating and influencing. And we saw many examples where the water sanitation situation has improved, but not that only. They've been able to apply this to other sectors. So we saw communities where they started with water, but then they started requesting electricity. They started requesting houses. Yeah. So it has been very powerful in ensuring or in planting those seeds. Then going forward, even without the NGO, the communities would use to improve their livelihoods. This is the case of Burkina I was telling you about. I'm not sure how many of you know Burkina, but Burkina is a tiny country in West Africa with 15 million inhabitants today. That guy that you see here is the second most powerful person in the country after the president. So he's the mayor of the capital, literally. And those people here with that nice hat are traditional leaders. So what happened, we as part of the program, we have a media network in that country. And what they did, they organized a press caravan. They invited this guy, his name is Simon. So they invited him to come to this press caravan. And they took him to a community which is just in his, in the capital, literally. It's the outskirts of the capital, but it's within the capital. They would no water, no sanitation. And he went there standing, thinking that he would take pictures and going. And then they start asking questions, very, very challenging questions to him. And then the journalists, they took it as an opportunity. That was someone, he understood now the power of this. And then they went back and he influenced, because he was the president, he's the president of the National Association of the Mayors of the whole country. So about 352 local governments. So he pushed for at least 65 of them to actually institutionalize the public hearing. So in 65 local governments today, they do public hearing at least once a year. And what they agree is that media network would come and film them. Yeah? I think this is something powerful as well, and this is more from the supply side. That's a duty bearer really who understood and who's been willing to be more accountable. This is Central America, and again, in Central America, in most of the countries, the water comes from the mountain. Really, it's been coming down for years. But what has happened over the past is many of these lands around the rivers was sold to private companies who would plant pineapple or these chiquitas, but using chemicals that pollute the water. So although they have water, but all that water is polluted. But what happened is, community themselves, when they had this push train on their rights, they've been able to make sure that these areas around the river are protected, and they are fighting against any of the illegal planters of pineapple. This is a community in El Porvenir, which is in the northern part of Honduras. And that has been very powerful. They're fighting literally, don't need any support. So they went to the Congress, and they're going to the Congress and request for the Congress to take action against those corporate companies. And then you can see here in Spanish, I mean, the payment is just part of your commitment, but you need to think beyond that, about the whole integrated resource management of your water. How am I doing? 2 minutes. 2 minutes of 15 or 2 minutes of 22? Uganda, we have this community radio, cross-cutting radio program, very powerful as well. Basically, the journalist goes to the community, records, take all the concern. So there is, come back to the station, broadcast it, and invite sometime the local elected people, or let's say the service providers, for them to respond. This has been able to address several corruption issues and even in the capital, in Kampala. But it's even more important because the organization supporting this is the CSO National Network in Water and Sanitation. Let me call it NGO National Network in Water and Sanitation, USNet. And what they're doing, they're taking all this concern, all these cases to the national level, because they managed to create an interface with the government, regular interface meeting with the government, and they are able to use that to influence the government. And today, for instance, their voice is so strong today that any external funding that needs to go to the water sector in Uganda, to any organization, that organization needs to have an accreditation from USNet, which is quite strong. Yeah. That has been institutionalized as well. And that's a last example, which is in Malawi, where they have the water and sanitation network that was created about a couple of years ago. Some of you may have seen this manual. It's a capacity need assessment tool that we developed in order to address that step one of our theory of change. So that capacity assessment goes through these 7 S's. So it's not only about training, but it's about looking at your organization as a whole. You know, do I have enough staff? Is it only one person doing everything? Do we have the skills actually to influence, to advocate, etc.? So this network went through this process where, straight from the beginning, they were clear on what they were trying to achieve and what they had, what resources they would need to be able to do that. So being more credible in front of the government. Today, they're the #1 voice. They're the only voice of the civil society in Uganda in terms of water and sanitation, of course. And donors like the European Commission, WSCC, have been able to, have decided to support them. And that's only within 2 years. I mean, in other countries, we've seen networks for 25 years. They have not been able to go anywhere. And that's really a great success. So, I mean, some of this point, or most of this point, I think Hilary will cover it. Although this is nice, but there are some question mark. You know, I mean, the last one is: are we talking about sustainability now, or are we talking about sustainability later? Should we think about scaling up? I mean, most of these examples are within 1 or 2 community, within 1 state. You know, for instance, in India, but is it enough? How do we kind of scale it up? Most of these examples, although now the communities or the organization, they've been able to take off, but the push or the trigger from the partner organization was very critical. Well, that requires funding. And funding not only to push, but funding for the organization as well to be able to sustain themselves. So there's a few areas or questions that we need to ask ourselves. So that's in 17 minutes, the WaterAid, the 4-year WaterAid program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Papa, and thank you for keeping to time despite starting late. We're going to move straight on to Hilary to hear, if you're ready, about a framework for thinking in more detail about sustainability of WASH interventions. And then after Hilary's presentation, we'll open it up for questions, particularly about some of WaterAid's experience and the lessons. And then we will move on and hear from Mike about DFID's broader perspective. So, Hilary.
Thank you very much.
15 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, and that should be plenty to open up a lot of questions, because I'm interested in asking questions as much as telling you about what's happening. Would you prefer? It's a bit. First of all, I'll probably we'll have to see whether I can work this or not, won't we? I'm here because I'm helping the GTF program here to do a piece of learning internally within the program, and then we're going to publish results. So I'm in the privileged position of being able to talk to a lot of people in a lot of countries and to regional consultants who've been doing the work for us, and then trying to pull it all together. And one of the papers or the products of this is something on sustainability. So this is exercising my mind quite a lot. And I want to say just a couple of things about the water sector, which the water sector people are not always so conscious of. But because I work across sectors, at least 2 or 3 sectors, I am more conscious. And that is that the water sector has not been doing some of this stuff for very long. Okay? That's a major difference. I was talking to Papa earlier today, and I said, well, when I was working in Oxfam in the late 1980s, that sort of thing about you get the people organised at the bottom and you work all the way through and then it's all fine, was something we were doing then. But in the water sector, this has really been last 10 years. People very good in the water sector at delivering services and really excellent services. But this is a new element for lots of them. So where they start is from a position where the NGOs themselves, the local NGOs, have to learn about it. Not they're already sitting there waiting to go. And I think that's a major difference. Oh, did you just switch it off? Yes, sir. Okay, thank you. So just the outline of the framework, which for sustainability, and we're looking at, in this I look specifically at bottom-up processes. Yeah, how sustainable is it if you work from the bottom up, and how does that work? And so this is a sort of outline, which you would need to adapt to every specific context and social and economic and so forth. All right, please take that as read. Pressure from below, from community groups and local NGOs. This is putting pressure on duty bearers, primarily governments, but other service providers too, at the local government office, at the district government office. Pressure from the top, from national level NGOs and international NGOs who get involved very much at this level, and the national networks that they belong to. And the networks are a key strategic element in this, because what Pablo was saying is when you work with a few partners in a few places, that's your spread. When you are part of a network, and much of this program is done through the networks or with the networks at national level, they spread it to all of the people who are in the network. So everyone in the network is now aware of governance processes. So it makes them very strategic parts of all of this. And we'll come back to why that's a problem later. So, and then external support as well. All the research tells you that community-based groups don't work very well on their own when you leave them alone for 10 years. So, what external support for those groups at that level, and what external support is required at national level? There is no way just citizens by themselves are going to achieve all of this and make it sustainable, really sustainable. So I'm going to go into all of that now. So, as Papa said, at community level, you need local NGOs who understand both the sector and governance issues, and who are able to do advocacy or understand advocacy themselves, so that they can build inclusive community-based organisations in the villages or in the municipalities. And those CBOs need a number of things. They need confidence. You know, when we say empowerment, empowerment is really about confidence. And it's only confidence that gets you to go by yourself to talk to some really arrogant and dismissive local government official who regards you coming from your level in society as a waste of space. You need to know you're not. So everybody has to be confident, but they also need a lot of skills and knowledge and tools. And they need to have those and be so comfortable with them that it doesn't matter that the NGO is there or not. Because in the end, it's only sustainable if they do it by themselves when they're not getting, you know, somebody coming in and out from the local NGO all the time. And then you need to have some support to keep them going. Now, on the programme, people have started to work out what that might be. So, we have different examples. We have, for example, one group in India has set up volunteer-run access centres, which sit in the middle of a group of different villages, and people can go to those and say that what their problem is, or can they have advice about how to go to the government or whatever it is. And these are run by local people who live there. Plus, at the moment, somebody from the NGO coming in and out occasionally. So this is, and other people in Bangladesh, they've already decided that in their dialogue groups with government, they will bring in local teachers and doctors and private sector people, businessmen and lawyers and so forth, because they stay in the area when other people go. And those people are able to provide mentoring support to the community groups. They're able to give them access sometimes to areas they couldn't get access to. And as we shall see later, they might be able to help with money. And so if you have some of these things going on, the other one is traditional authorities in Africa. Communities in the north of Ghana are linked up to the Queen Mother of the local tribe. So, and she turned out to be a really sort of firebrand when it comes to getting things done, and they can now go to her when the NGO goes. So you have to find somebody, because we know that they don't really last quite so well on their own. So that's at community level. At national level, NGOs, INGOs, and their networks. And the networks are the key here. And they've also got to have all the skills that you need in terms of research, evidence gathering, you know, organising, running themselves, etc., and good advocacy skills. And as they are becoming very conscious of now, because the GTF programme is working with people and networks that have already been in existence sometimes, and they've started to produce code of ethics or, you know, statements of governance or whatever, so that they are looking at their own internal processes and very busy trying to manage power relations within the networks and inclusivity and good behaviour and transparency and accountability. The networks are key because they have members at the grassroots, and they have members who are policy-focused, national level people, and these two come together, often in working groups, and they can link up and say, this is what we need in the new policy. This is, we can make this work. The policy does not work. It looks good in theory, but it actually doesn't work, and we need these changes and those things. So that's very helpful. If they engage in constructive dialogue with government, they start to build an atmosphere of trust between NGOs and networks and government, which begins to open spaces. And we see in the water sector that most of these networks go to the joint sector review meetings, they meet with the international donors in meetings. In some countries, they're on every single sector working group that exists. And they have special groups of their own that go into every single sector working group, so that their influence is there. What is important is that they take not only sector issues into that, but issues that are governance issues. Whether they raise them directly or indirectly, they're promoting dialogue, they're promoting participation and consultation, greater transparency in operation. And that's really important. And that's the way in which they join sector concerns. You know, are we going to have enough toilets and wells? And how the sector needs to work in the long term, so that you can have citizens' engagement and monitoring of services. But we know really you can't do that all by yourselves. We can't do the whole of the sector governance by yourselves. There are very important actors. First of all, I think what's really important is to have some political will for all of this. You are doing something rather more than you think that you are on a good governance programme, because you are changing the balance of power between government and government officials and the citizens. Because government is used to saying, right, we decide, we do, you take. And you're saying, we want to have a voice in here. We want to be able to be consulted. We want to tell you about things. We want to be able to ask for things. We want to know what you're doing, how much it costs, and whether we're entitled to it or not. So you need politicians to help you. You need to have some political champions to help with some of this. Right to information that Papa mentioned before is a very important tool here. And it's there, actually, in 6, 7 of our countries. It will be in Ghana by the end of this year. So that'll be 7, and it's not there everywhere, or it's there only in the Constitution and not operationalised. So actually pushing for that. Pushing for institutionalisation of things is very important. It's not relying on your relationship with the current minister. At least you can try and get it into some sort of policy or law so it's operational for everybody, everywhere. You can't do anything about a coup, however. But they've still got to change it, or they've just got to ignore the law completely. International donors have a really, and when I say international donors, I mean development partners and everybody else. Yes, 2 minutes. Very important to deal with things that we can't do. Reform of the civil service, capacity building in the civil service, sorting out local government altogether from start to finish, probably. Things like supply chains and procurement and all of those things beyond our concern. Private sector providers, because having the private sector on your side is good, partly because they quickly know that dialogue with their consumers is a good idea. Then they promote it to government and it doesn't just look like the usual suspects, and other public figures who can help and support the cause, which sometimes is judges. In different countries it's different people, but they popularise it so that people think, yes, that's how our country should be. We should have good governance in our country. We should support citizens' engagement in our country. There are a whole load of challenges and questions, and I'm only going to do one, and then I'm going to get Tom to throw some other ones at you later. This, first of all, obviously, for those of us running GTF programs, mostly they're just sort of coming to their end now, so how do we know whether it's sustainable or not? You have to be away. The other thing is, what are we trying to sustain? Is it the water services that people have done? If the toilets in the wells are doing, is that enough? I think we really think not quite enough. We need more. Is it the demands on the communities, for this bottom-up stuff, the demand on the communities is huge when you think about it. They have got to have all sorts of skills and capacities and competencies and behave in ways in which we don't behave ourselves. Inclusivity is absolutely key, and there will be gender equality throughout. However, sitting in this room probably, there are people in organisations who have not yet managed full inclusivity, and in fact don't even have access for people if they wanted a wheelchair, let alone are they having an awful lot of people who didn't get their O-levels. Or are there, so we have our own problems, and we sort of project onto the community this sort of magic that they're all going to be able to do some perfect thing. And I think that's not realistic. It's not realistic to expect communities to sit down and meet every 2 weeks or whatever schedule they've been given by the NGO, because we don't do that either about our community issues. You activate yourself when something needs to be done, and then you do it. And you don't get 100% participation, because you never get 100% participation. So I think we need to be sort of realistic. This is a real question for me. Is the community-based organisations' tendency to focus on getting their service rather than thinking about the government, how that is governed? So is it, how you change their relationship with government, is that important? I don't know. And also I just wanted to say that 5 years is a very short time to do some of this and to get it in place. Partly because you can't do it yourself, all of it, and partly because changing relationships of power is not something that you do in a sustainable fashion in a short time. If you are a woman, you would say it certainly isn't. If you come from my generation of feminists, you would say we did, and then suddenly it's all being unravelled a bit. So, sustaining things is hard work over time. And there are two really questions here for me. One is, the CBOs need support, and the NGOs and the networks need funding. And where is that going to come from when the programme ends? And the other is, because there's a sort of sense that maybe we haven't even convinced our own organisations, some organisations about this, what we need to do to reinvigorate and re-energise the support for better governance in the way that it sustains progress in all areas of development, where people are going, we've been doing this now for 15 years and maybe we should do something else, because these things move in fashions. And that's for us, but it's also for all the development partners and the international donors who could easily think of something else. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Hilary. What I want to do now is maybe take a round of questions for Papa and for Hilary on the basis of those two presentations. A couple of things I'd pull out, I think, which is useful. As Papa says, we're coming very much from a water sector perspective, and the GTF programme that WaterAid runs is operating across a very wide range of contexts, but in all of those contexts we have this problem of a lack of strong CSO capacity for our issue. And as Hilary says, well, you kind of need CSOs or NGOs who not only understand the sector enough to be active and credible when it comes to engaging with government, they also need to understand the governance agenda, and finding organisations or partners that can do both of those things is a real challenge. We've heard lots of examples from Papa about doing that from the bottom up at sort of CBO level, from the top down at the NGO network level, and raising lots of questions about what forms of ongoing external support are required. How do we catalyse an activity that leads to a change without creating dependency? Papa highlighted sustainability of actions as distinct from the sustainability of organisations or networks, and I think that's useful. And I would add in something else there, which is probably the sustainability of accountability relationships, and that's really where we make the link between these demand-side activities and the supply-side governance issues that Papa was talking about at the end there. And Papa says, the key here is really empowerment. So once you start to see those signs of empowerment, then things can really take off. But it's very difficult to predict how and when that might happen, and to tailor support accordingly. So lots of challenges, lots of questions. Some are specific to the water and sanitation sector, but I'm sure many of them chime with others who are working on this issue. So maybe if you've got questions, you could say your name and who you work with, and we'll talk about those two presentations for about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll move on to hear from Mike from Difford. Yes, please.
John Morgan from GRM International. We're a consulting organisation. We do quite a lot of work in voice and accountability, although not specifically in WASH. First of all, I'd like to thank Papa and Hilary for two really thought-provoking presentations and providing a lot of the information and knowledge about the demand side. And I wanted to draw up on one of Hilary's final points about the sustainability of the government response. A lot of what we've talked about here has been building the capacity of community organisations and communities to demand better service and to have their voices heard and to influence and be empowered. And the flip side of that, which was alluded to a little bit by discussions, was, okay, what's the supply side response from government? And whether or not you are wedded to government service delivery supply, or whether government is an enabler for private sector delivery, etc. But you still have to influence government. And what happens is, constantly we find people are knocking on the doors, and where you start to get more information and more data about the specific delivery given, then that helps. And a civil servant or the mayor of Ouagadougou suddenly finds themselves sat under a tree with a lot of cameras pointing at him is helpful. But how that then gets institutionalised in a sustainable way back into government systems is something that then needs addressing. It may be that we dump it on other people's the donors' programmes to build that capacity. but I fear that if you, even by building voice and influencing and accountability mechanisms in a sustainable way, what you do is build the capacity of people to knock on the door and ask the right questions, rather than necessarily having the response from government to do anything other than respond to the question that's in front of them at the time. So that sustainable change that governments and supply institutions is sort of the flip side of the equation. I've worked on quite a few governance programs inside civil services and so on. I see a lot of resistance to change, and so having the demand side built is necessary but not sufficient to get better sustainable service. And I know I thought the point about are we building governance per se rather than just service delivery responses to specific issues is the crux of this matter.
Okay, good. Let's take a couple more. Yes, please, at the front.
Andy Rutherford, previously of Onward Action, and involved in lots of governance programs over the last 20 years. I'd like to cut through the sort of dilemma with a question. There's a sort of subtext of presenting it's either or. You either have stronger service delivery programs, and then we also come along to governance as well. There's a tension of trying to make sure that there's some competencies or political will or community motivations that to add, to paraphrase the governance issues to the service delivery is the area that has to be engaged with. To help that through, is it worth trying to turn it around? And to the simple question would be, is it at all possible to have a successful, sustainable water sector wash programme without transparent and accountable relationships, both within the delivery organisations, community organisations, relationships with the government, or whoever. And therefore, actually in presentation, not to present it as a dilemma at all, but actually to work through the different examples, case studies, and experiences of how the governance dimension, as it gets strengthened, as it gets more accepted, and as it gets more integrated into programmes, actually enables the programmes to be more sustainable and successful. Because that's, in a sense, the other side of the GTF wish, but also base WaterAid's community motivations. So the simple question is it at all possible to have a successful, sustainable water sector programme without the governance strengthening that you talk about?
And a question in the middle? Lady in the
Ms. Hart, for anti-corruption resource sector. We've been working quite a bit on issues related to mainstreaming governance and anti-corruption sectors, and what I find very interesting about being in a setting like this is to hear very concretely from people who are implementing sectoral programs. It was noted that this is new to the sectoral programs, and I'd be very interested to hear from you what concretely were the different questions or the different issues that you found yourselves having to work on or develop with your community partners that you wouldn't have been asking about if you had been, quote, doing your old approach to water and sanitation. Just very concretely, from the perspective of people who are sector people, what are kind of the different issues that you face?
Okay, one more question before I take it back to the panel. So the gentleman just behind.
Thank you. Christian Solberg, working for FTL Development and New South Consultancy. I'm interested in this term sustainability gets bandied about quite a lot in this sector. How did you actually measure it? I mean, monitoring and evaluation has become a great part of the sector in the last 10, 15 years, and there's very more advanced methods of doing that. But how is actually a term like sustainability, which means a lot of different things in a lot of contexts, how is that concretely operationalised? How indicates development, if at all? I mean, particularly for this project, I'll be very interested to see. I mean, how do you operationalise these things? How do you monitor it? How do you track it? I mean, do you model? Do you have an idea about in 10 years' time that we're going to be sustainable and this is how we're going to achieve it in measurable, or dare I say, quantifiable terms? Or is that something that was always going to be a qualitative, we think we are sustainable now, or we think we will be sustainable in 10 years' time?
Jerry, you had one last question.
Yeah, very quick. Jerry Adams, independent consultant, currently working with Article 19 on right to information, freedom of expression. I was interested, Hilary, in the example you gave in India of these sort of community citizens advice groups where people can go to, but it seemed that the key point there was that the local CBO, or local NGO, was also inputting there and providing some support. So is sustainability, at least in the short or medium term, dependent on having strong CBOs, strong local NGOs, that actually community sustainability in the short to medium term is not feasible?
Let's, Papa, do you want to try and respond to some of those questions, and then we'll pick up some of the others with Hilary. Do you want to make a start?
Okay, so on the supply side one, I mean, didn't present everything, but in Nigeria, in West Africa, we have what we call the Local Millennium Development Goal Initiative. So that started about 8 years ago. And the whole point of that was to work with the local governments and try to help them to understand the role they had to play towards achieving the MDGs. So given the weak capacity, because that's the big issue, the weak capacity, what we've been doing through the partners is to help them in doing a kind of strategic planning. So get the data at least. We can support you in getting the data, but when you get the data, you need to own this process now. You know, what am I going to do in my local government, you know, as a mayor or as a local elected person? Where are the pockets without water? Where are the the poor people, where they are, the marginalized? And then through that tool, using mapping, so we've seen local government becoming very, very, very proactive. You know, they don't need any more the local partners. They would go work with the searching for donors in order to fund their plan. I mean, a 5-year plan that they would develop. So that's some of the kind of things that we've done. I mean, I think Nigeria is one of Nigeria and Ghana. They're doing it as part of GTF program. I mean, as part of WaterAid program, but as part of the GTF program as well, which is a kind of example of working from the supply side, I would think. But it's still challenging because weak capacity of government is a reality, fortunately.
Can I just add something on that?
Yeah, sure.
Which is that I think you're right to point this out, because there's another question in my other one which says, what if nobody else takes on all the other things that are required? You know, and what I've actually written down is bottom-up processes doomed to fail, right? So because it is a genuine question, that you can do so much, NGOs can do so much, and then there is a limit to their competencies and a limit to their reach. And if other people don't step into that breach, it doesn't matter. I don't know if it has to be donors or, you know, advisors or something, or a brilliant prime minister who knows has got a good, whatever it is. If somebody doesn't do that, if you don't, you know, in the wash sector, for example, it's horribly fragmented, and there's incoherent responsibilities and things, so which makes it terribly complicated to know even who's responsible for doing what. So that's not an issue that we can easily resolve from an NGO basis. Even a big national network is going to be needing some help, partly from donors who are part of the reason for the fragmentation, but also, you know, you need political will. That's what I was trying to say, is you need a whole series of things. I think it needs to be popularised. I think everybody needs to think it's good. I think there need to be people with political will who really want to do it. You need to have, you know, support from the donors, especially in developing countries whose budgets are mostly funded by them. And, you know, you need to get all of these things working together, I think. Otherwise, you're right.
Maybe a call for realism about what you can reasonably expect to achieve through an externally funded NGO programme. I'm presuming, Hilary and Papa, you would both agree with the gentleman's point here about it not being an either-or. I mean, that's partly why WaterAid has got involved with this governance and transparency programme in the first place, is this recognition that you need both sides in order to be sustainable. I wondered, Papa, if you could pick up on this point about what concretely, or how this concretely looks different to what has gone before. The question was coming from a sort of anti-corruption angle, particularly. You know, what looks different as a result of looking at both sides of the coin?
I mean, definitely there is an improving transparency. I mean, that's for sure. I mean, you take all the countries, the 16 countries, I mean, they have 16 different contexts, but in most of the countries, definitely this push or this, I don't want to say this pressure from the other side has improved transparency. So no choice, which we didn't have before. I mean, before we used to do our program, but as I said at the beginning, there is a legal framework, there is all the policy in place, but they're not being implemented. But having another actor coming and asking, holding you to account, I mean, they're becoming more open and they're responding. They're responding. I think that's one of them. Some issue that we've been facing was more around, I mean, that bottom-up approach. You go to the community, you want to empower the community, but they have other expectations. Okay, so we want to empower them, but what they want is water at the end of the day. Why are you coming and telling me, well, I need to be empowered? Just put a borehole here, and I'm going to have my water. And that has been some of the challenges that we've been facing. This is why it takes time. I still have to say it takes real time really to get to that level. Although in some contexts it has gone very very quickly. India is one of them, but India, they have this experience. I mean, they have the history of I don't want to say activism, but the social movement. But in other countries is really, especially in Africa, is very very difficult. Has been very difficult, and we're still working towards getting people to look at the other side. How strong could you be if you were empowered enough to go and demand? You could get 10 times, 100 times more than what you're getting.
Okay, good. And the last two questions were about measurements. So, how do we go about measuring these things? Is it purely qualitative, or is there anything we can quantify by way of indicators? And then Jerry's point, at what point should we realistically expect these things to be sustainable in any measurable way?
I wondered if Girish actually has, tucked reverse in his head, the WaterAid thing on what do we consider to be sustainability, because there is, and I'm do you want to volunteer, or shall I try and do my own meta?
Why don't you try first and then
Okay, all right. So WaterAid, at the time, it was thinking about was not sustainability in governance, but sustainability in service. And it said, for us, sustainability is that all the progress and improvements that are achieved during the lifetime of a project or a program continue to exist. And not only that, but they are on an upward trajectory of constant improvement. And there is no finite limit to this. You are always looking for what the seed you have grown to be becoming a little sapling, and then a tree, and then a bigger tree, and a bigger tree. There's no limit. Which makes sense if you think about it in water as well, because you say, well, we want the well to be sustainable. Well, not really. We want piped water for everybody. So if we have the well sustainable, that's the first part, but there should be a trajectory that moves. So it's not limited in time. If you talk about monitoring, I'm sure Jerry would probably like to say something about this, but if you talk about how you measure it, it's easy really to measure whether the well is working or people are using the toilet, and also whether people are healthier or not healthier. That is all very straightforward. To measure whether there is an upward trajectory in the governance situation is more difficult because of the constant hiccups you get. So at any point in time, you could go to a local government office and it could have changed all its staff, right? And then you're actually starting again, even if or the staff haven't been trained. Sometimes, I suppose one thing that didn't really come out is that, of course, the GTF program doesn't work in isolation. It works surrounded by all these other activities, including WaterAid's own other activities in country, which are building capacity at local government level and more on the supply side than the demand side, as it were, and all the other things that are happening around. So there are a lot of issues about changes in staff everywhere, and what happens when staff change, which is, I suppose, one of the great things about a network on one end and a community-based organisation on the other. The community does change, of course, over time as generations come and go, and the network changes its membership and moves and grows or decreases in size, but they're there, and everything else is very much in change. And so that is it's not, I don't have an answer to how you know. I know how you know where the services are there, and I know that you can say, now, we have this law. Now, we can mark this out. Is it a good thing that the Nigerian government, the ministry, has asked the network that the GTF programme is working with to get its members to monitor the progress made on local supply services in the water sector? Is that progress? I think it's progress. If the Ugandan government always invites UASNet members, one or two UASNet members, to every single meeting that they have on sector issues, is that progress? I think it's progress. Is it sustainable? If we go back in 15 years, we'll know if that bit was sustainable. But by then, we won't be interested in that, because that will be commonplace, and what we'll be aiming for is something higher. And I think the idea of the trajectory is appealing to me, that what you're supposed to be doing is improving, and you give yourselves a forgiveness sort of mark if there's a coup and it gets taken over by some horrible dictator who sits there for the next 5 years.
Okay, thank you. Papa, anything to add on measurement?
We have, as WaterAid, we have a sustainability framework, which is more around the service delivery. And we have what we call the post-implementation monitoring survey, which is really going back 1, 3, 5, 10 years back and see whether our services are still lasting. One of the things with the growing work we have, or increasing work we have in terms of advocacy, etc., that's one of the things that we're factoring into those PIMs, seeing going forward, can we go back and see those services are there, but all the structure that was set up, that was in place, are they still there as well? So that's work, on the progress. But definitely, I would say for the time being, it would be more qualitative. But I think the more we go in, we need some quantity really to to back up that qualitative analysis.
I think the only thing I would add there, just abusing my position as chair, is, as Hilary said at the beginning, in the wash sector, we're coming to this governance agenda rather later than some of our colleagues in health and education. And if you were to be having this discussion in the health sector, it would be all about system strengthening and sector strengthening. It's looking much more broadly at the sector and how it functions. It's not just the functionality of the water points or how many health facilities you have or whatever. And that's very much a growing agenda within the water sector as well, and is very much the focus of, for example, these joint sector review meetings, where there are a number of indicators, some of which are quantifiable, some of which are more qualitative and process type indicators, which are used to measure this sort of notion of continuous incremental progress across the entire sector. But certainly that's not something which is within the control of any one of those stakeholders that Hilary listed. So that's when bringing in the donors, the media, the private sector, and the politicians and the opinion formers is all important. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Mike from DFID, who I think is going to talk for 10 minutes or so to give it a broader perspective. Mike is with the Civil Society Department, which is responsible for managing the Governance and Transparency Fund, not just WaterAid's grant, but a whole range of grants.
Yeah, that's right. Great. Hi, I'm Mike Babcock. I work in the Civil Society Department, as was just said, in the Department for International Development. I lead on the Governance and Transparency Fund. I've worked with civil society organisations for 25 years. I started off for many years in a civil society organisation. It was heavily focused on technology, and there were always technological problems that were identified and technological solutions. And then we were always surprised that they never worked. Because it was always the governance, it was always the institutional arrangement. I mean, the technology was easy. It was the governance side that was hard. Yeah, I'm working on the Governance and Transparency Fund. We're talking here about sustainability and the long-term impact. Governance and Transparency Fund is all about strengthening civil society to help citizens to